Round 8. The kid was fast. DeMarco knew that he'd be quick. He'd watched the tapes on him, but he wasn't expecting him to be able to slip his left so easily. It was like he knew it was coming before he even threw it. For a second, he began to wonder if the 19-year-old Russian circling him in the ring really was the better fighter. The promoter seemed to think so. The only reason he had been given this fight was so the kid could pad his record with a recognizable name. The Bronx Bomber, DeMarco Looney. A name that used to mean something in the sport of boxing. It used to. The kid had never been knocked out. Hell, he'd never even tasted the canvas over the course of his short professional career, and DeMarco's hook was his best punch. If he couldn't land that, then what chance did he have? The kid connected with a solid cross to the jaw, and for a brief second DeMarco's vision faded. Not all the way to black, but the Bronx Bomber had been hit enough times to know that he had been rocked. To anyone in the nearly empty arena who may have been watching, it would have looked like the cross didn't even register. DeMarco's head barely moved when the punch landed, but the kid's fist felt like a shotgun slug to the chin. It sent a wave of heat through his face that pulsed all the way to his ears. He rushed the young fighter as fast as he could, wrapped his arms tightly around him, and hung on for dear life. A few seconds later, a much smaller man wearing a blue shirt and black bow tie managed to force his way in between the two heavyweights. The referee placed a hand on each fighter's chest and forced them apart with surprising power. There was no more punches thrown in that round, thanks only in part to the Russian's inexperience. DeMarco realized a more seasoned fighter would have smelled blood after the cross and tried to put him down. He was completely gassed, but luckily, the kid had been respecting his power a little too much. The bell rang and the two men dropped their fists. DeMarco staggered to his corner and crumpled down into the stool his cut man had placed out for him. "You doing all right, champ?" The voice was gruff and husky. It sounded like how sandpaper feels. It was the voice of a man who had been drinking for 30 years, smoking for 40, and cursing even longer than that. "Yeah, I'm good." DeMarco glanced up to see Richie's gnarled old face hovering just inches from his. He could tell his trainer was worried, but there was still hope in his eyes. The sight caused him to straighten up in his seat. The fight was far from over. He had taken his licks, but Richie hadn't given up, and neither would he. The elderly man's cracked lips bowed into an anxious frown. They flapped like two burnt pieces of bacon as he spoke. "He caught you pretty good there, champ, but I don't need to tell you that." Richie's voice garbled like a cement mixer. "Come on, you're too good to be walking right into that punch." DeMarco knew that he'd be lucky to have the old man with him that night. In reality, he was no champion, but Richie Bohanna was the top trainer in the sport. He was a man who only took the very best under his wing, a man who worked with real champions. Yet there he was, crouched down in the corner of a washed-up old boxer at a non-televised preliminary fight. When DeMarco showed up to his gym 6 months prior, told him that he wanted to get back into the game, the old trainer didn't hesitate to take him on as a pet project. Perhaps he felt that he owed some part of his success to DeMarco. The heavyweight gazed out at all the vacant seats in the arena and remembered back to a time when people came to see him fight, back when he and Richie were rising up the ranks together. But the drugs and alcohol had derailed his career before he had lost everything to a gambling addiction and a messy divorce, before his little girl had... Champ, you listening to me? I said watch his shoulder. He's dipping his shoulder every time he throws the cross. Step around it and nail him with the hook. The referee was standing right behind Richie now. He quickly informed them the next round would start in 10 seconds, then hurried across the ring to tell the Russian's corner the same thing. Richie buried a bony finger into the front of DeMarco's bulky deltoid to accentuate his point. "Watch the shoulder, champ. He's leaving himself wide open for you." The veteran nodded to his old friend, and then sprung to his feet. Richie and the rest of DeMarco's corner emptied the ring. Round 9. Aside from a few people here and there, the first 50 rows of the arena were almost totally barren. In a few hours, once the cameras turned on and the main event was ready to begin, the building would fill with celebrities and socialites, each of whom had shelled out exorbitant amounts of money just to be seen at the event. DeMarco couldn't help but notice the woman in the shimmering black dress, who had already taken her seat in the front row. She had hair like midnight and bright red lips, smooth olive skin, and exotic features. The woman was gorgeous. There was no denying that. Even if the arena had been packed, DeMarco was sure the beauty would have stood out in the crowd. Yet he found her to be more off-putting than alluring. He couldn't explain why, but her presence upset him. He wondered why she was there, all by herself, staring at him from the row of empty chairs. Her seat was worth an easy 50 grand, and nobody with that kind of money ever shows up before the camera started rolling. Was she famous? He didn't recognize her, but still, she seemed familiar. Familiar, and in some sort of strange way, repulsively beautiful. The kid was more aggressive in this round. DeMarco pushed the woman out of his mind and focused on weathering the young fighter's offense. The Russian threw a quick 1-2, and DeMarco took it in stride. Richie was screaming something from the corner, but the old vet couldn't hear it. Another 1-2 followed by an uppercut, and now his face was stinging. He threw a jab to keep the kid back. It didn't land, and when the Russian countered with another uppercut, he knew he was in trouble. DeMarco backed away, but not before swinging wildly with a haymaker, missing the kid by an inch. Damn, he thought to himself, almost got him. Still, it was enough to keep his opponent at bay. The kid had a look on his face like he had just dodged a bullet, and DeMarco saw that at least one person in the ring believed he might still have a little left over from his days as the IBF heavyweight champion. He caught a glimpse of the woman again out of the corner of his eye. She was standing at the ringside now, gripping the bottom rope with her hand as she glared at him. Her stare was cold and distant. It burned a hole in his chest. He felt a bizarre urge to jump out of the ring and sprint down the Vegas Strip until he was as far from the arena as possible. The kid closed in on him in the corner and unleashed a brutal flurry. DeMarco covered his face, but he was being bombarded, one ferocious blow after the other. He ducked as low as he could. Each shot felt like it was rattling his brain inside of his skull. He knew he wouldn't be able to take many more. But the barrage ended suddenly, and when DeMarco looked up, the kid was calmly walking back to his corner. "Champ, you coming?" Richie was already inside the ring, waving him over. DeMarco was sure the ref had stopped the fight. He hadn't even heard the bell, though. Apparently, it had rung, signaling the end of the round. Luck must have been on his side, because a few more seconds of absorbing the kid's punches would have been enough to end the bout. He stumbled over to his corner on shaky legs and collapsed on his stool. "What's going on, champ? You don't even look like you're paying attention out there." The referee jogged over to the corner and grabbed Richie by the sleeve of his shirt. He said something to him, but DeMarco's ears were ringing too much from all the headshots to make it out. Richie was scowling at the ref. His usual sneer was even more crooked than normal. As his hearing began to come back to him, DeMarco was able to pick up the last little bit of their back and forth. "He's peachy, Steve," Richie growled. "Don't worry about him. You should be worrying about that punk over there rabbit-punching my fighter every time they go to cinch. Now, would you mind? I'm trying to work here." The ref backed away, and Richie turned to face DeMarco. "I can't beat him, Rich," the old boxer moaned. "My comeback, the whole thing. It was a mistake." Richie shot a liver-spotted hand over and grabbed DeMarco tight around the wrist. "You think I call you champ for shits and giggles? Back when we were coming up together, you were one of the best fighters I ever saw. Don't you give up yet. Remember what you said when you walked into my gym 6 months ago?" DeMarco nodded, took a sip from the water bottle that was being held in front of his face, then hawked what he didn't want to swallow into a spit bucket. His saliva came out as red as the gloves that he wore on his fists. "You said you wanted to do it for Trinity. You said you knew she was watching you from heaven. You wanted to make her proud." Trinity was DeMarco's daughter. After the divorce, his wife had won sole custody of their little girl. His public battle with drugs and gambling was enough to convince the judge that DeMarco was an unfit parent. Trinity and her mother moved back across the country to New York, and aside from the occasional phone call, he had lost all contact with her. It had been 2 years since he last saw her when he received a call from Hackensack Medical Center's trauma ward. DeMarco was in his 6th month at a rehab clinic in Malibu at the time. There had been an accident in the Jersey Turnpike. The car his 11-year-old daughter was in had collided with a semi-truck. She died on the operating table in the hospital's ER. Richie stared apprehensively into his old friend's eyes, waiting for him to say something. "You're right," DeMarco grunted. "I ain't just fighting for me no more." There was nothing left to say. The once great champion rose to his feet and began to bounce to his stance. Round 10. The kid had size and speed on him. He may have been a more skilled boxer, but he was too young to have battled the demons DeMarco had. The old veteran knew these demons had toughened him up. They had made his skin thick and calloused. The Russian had never considered downing an entire bottle of oxycodone. He had never lost his fortune to lawyers and debt collectors and been forced to start over with nothing. And perhaps more importantly, he had never been forced to bury his daughter. The fight was DeMarco's last chance at redemption. No promoter would ever give him another shot at a comeback if he didn't win. He knew he had to make it count. The kid came out of the gate swinging. DeMarco bobbed and weaved, avoiding most of the attacks and threw a few jabs to create some space between them. He set him up for faking with his left, then landed a solid body blow that nearly doubled the Russian over, but the kid recovered quickly and squared up before he could capitalize. The Russian was looking anxious now, and DeMarco could see the frustration in his eyes. Watch the shoulder, he thought to himself. Look for the dip. The kid faked with his head, and then when DeMarco saw his opening, the shoulder dropped just like Richie said it would. The cross was coming, but this time DeMarco was ready for it. He stepped to the side and connected with a vicious left to the temple of the Russian's face that set him reeling for the ropes. DeMarco felt like he was back on top of the game again. He moved in on the kid and started teeing off for him. Talking trash just like he did in his glory days. Thought I was a washed-up old man, didn't you? Thought you were gonna walk all over me. He peppered him with shot after shot until the kid wrapped him up. They wrestled around on the ropes for a few seconds. It was during that clinch that the woman in the black dress caught DeMarco's eye once more. She had moved to the ring steps. Her blank expression and icy gaze still fixed upon him. Her stare was uncanny. DeMarco couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him, and not the fight. As if everyone else in the arena didn't exist. Why did she disgust him so? He couldn't say, but he could barely stand being so near her. He tried to get the official's attention. "Hey, where the hell's security?" he asked. "Why is she allowed to stand over there?" But the referee didn't acknowledge him. He was too busy prying the large men apart. The woman was tall and gaunt. DeMarco thought she must have been a model. Her cheekbones were prominent fixtures on her face. They jutted out below her eyes like two cliffs descending sharply into smooth brown seas of her skin. She did not open her mouth. Her lips stayed sealed, steadfast. The sight of her made him want to cower in the corner like a wounded dog, and still, he could not understand why. He turned to say something to the referee again, but felt a sudden intense pressure on his left eye. And then the world went black. When the world came into view again, it did so not at the same time. The light rig above the ring materialized first, followed quickly by the catwalk. Sounds came next. He could hear Richie's rough, scratchy voice shouting for him to get up. Finally, he heard the referee's count. 4. DeMarco tilted his head and saw the official standing over him. The kid had caught him with a good one. He hadn't been knocked out that cleanly in years. 5. He pushed himself up on one elbow and glimpsed around the ring. The kid was watching him from his corner. His training staff was celebrating around him, but the Russian's face bore an intense, serious stare. DeMarco's head was throbbing. It felt like that last punch had cracked his skull open like an egg. 6. He struggled up to one knee. The woman was still standing on the ring steps. The lights of the arena reflected off her bare shoulders, and in that moment, she looked both horrible and heavenly. 7. She reached out a long, tan leg, the one visible through the high cut in her sequin gown, and stepped up to the ring apron. Her eyes were piercing, two dark onyx stones buried deep into the quarry of her face. They weren't just watching DeMarco. They were devouring him. He felt that same inexplicable fear beginning to amplify. 8! Oh God, he thought. She's coming to get me. Why me? Why is she coming to get me? 9! It was fighter's instinct that caused him to shoot to his feet before the official reached 10. He stopped his count and started his quick inspection of DeMarco. "Hey, you okay?" the referee asked. "Yeah, get that woman off the ring. She's distracting me." The ref gave him an odd look. "Oh, the ring girl? Round's about to end." "No, the other one." DeMarco paused suddenly, realizing the official didn't know whom he was referring to. "Just forget it. I'm fine, okay?" The Russian had come out of his corner and was waiting like a caged lion, ready to pounce on DeMarco again as soon as he was given the word. "You say so," said the official. He backed away until he was halfway between the two boxers. "Fight's on!" The kid came at him fast. He was ready to end the fight. DeMarco, flustered by the woman standing in the ring apron, couldn't do anything but throw his hands up in defense. He deflected 2 quick blows with his fist before the bell rang mercifully, saving him from slaughter. "Champ! Champ! Get over here!" Richie was frantically waving his towel in the air, signaling DeMarco to the corner. The old boxer hobbled over and sat down. "Jesus Christ!" Richie spat. "Would you look at that eye?" He turned to the cut man. "Hey, Joey! Get a cold compress on his eye right now. We gotta get the swelling down." DeMarco felt the cold metal instrument being firmly pressed to the flesh around his eye, and it was only then that he recognized just how tender he was in that spot. Richie rumbled on. "Now look, champ, I ain't gonna lie. You're way behind in points, especially after that knockdown. It's time we start thinking about going for the knockout." "Why is that lady allowed to stand on the ring during the fight, Rich?" DeMarco's question had caused the old trainer to stop suddenly in his tracks. "What?" "A lady, Rich. The lady in the black dress. She stood on the ring all last round and I couldn't concentrate. She's still standing there. Now look, damn it, Richie, don't you see her?" Richie's face sunk. "Champ, you okay?" "There ain't no woman on the ring save for the ring girl. She just hopped up there." "The fuck there ain't, Rich. She's right there." "You know what? Fuck you. Fuck her. Fuck that Russian punk too." The referee ran over to their corner. 10 seconds, guys." Richie spoke with care to his old friend, voice rolling out of his mouth as smoothly as his cigarette-ravaged throat could allow. "Champ, what day of the week is it?" Saturday, DeMarco answered. He was looking out across the ring at the woman. Her detached, awful stare had never broken from him. "The day I finally do the right thing by my little girl." He lumbered to his feet. Round 11. DeMarco now understood that he was the only one who could see the woman standing in the corner of the ring. It was an idea that terrified him, yet buried somewhere beneath his horror, he was beginning to feel a bizarre euphoria stirring inside him. The woman's presence was now fueling DeMarco. It ignited a fire in his belly that had motivated him to win more than ever, if for no other reason than to spite his mysterious onlooker. "She wants me to lose," he thought to himself, "but I'm not gonna fail." The Bronx Bomber needed a home run. With only 2 rounds left, a knockout was his only conceivable shot at victory. His head was aching terribly, but he was no stranger to pain. DeMarco pushed past the pounding in his skull and attacked the Russian. He backed his opponent into a corner, then unloaded on him in a frantic attempt to put him down. The kid rolled out of it and struck him with a couple of jabs. DeMarco shook them off and again went on the offensive. He caught the kid on the ropes and threw everything he had towards his body. But once more, the Russian was able to escape, this time connecting with a brutal cross to his engorged eye, causing DeMarco to stagger back. The air that filled his lungs burned sharp, and he realized that in his desperation, he had punched himself out. His fists felt like lead weights, and he could barely hold them up to his face. DeMarco shot a glance at the woman in the black dress. She had been standing motionless in the corner for the moment. She stepped up to the edge of the ring, but now she was beginning to rouse from her frozen state. Slowly, she paced down the apron, almost floating, her hand gliding along the top rope as she moved, all the while her terrible stare fastened firmly on DeMarco. The kid landed 2 more shots while DeMarco's attention was diverted. He swung violently at him, trying to answer back, but he felt his glove skip off the top of the Russian opponent's head. His heart was racing a million miles an hour. The air rushing in and out of his lungs stung like millions of tiny needles. His muscles were on fire and his head was throbbing worse than ever. DeMarco knew the cross was coming. The kid had dropped his shoulder again, but this time he didn't have the energy to dodge it. The Russian's fist connected squarely with DeMarco's jaw, rendering him unconscious before he even hit the ground. There was darkness after that. Only darkness. Then, out of the black void, DeMarco saw his daughter's face. He wanted to reach out and touch her, but he had no body with which to do so. He tried to speak, but alas, he had no voice to communicate with. If he could, he would have told her that he loved her. He would have begged Trinity to forgive him for all of his past indiscretions. He would have explained that he had dedicated the fight to her, and that she was the reason he had tried to turn his life around. She smiled at him. Her round face warmed his heart. And for the first time, in as long as he could remember, he loved himself again. But this would not last. Slowly, Trinity's face began to fade away, leaving DeMarco alone in the empty black void again. And then, as quickly as the darkness came, the light returned. A horrible yellow light, the kind fastened to the rig that hung above the ring. 7! The referee was counting again, and DeMarco realized he was on his back. 8! Trinity. DeMarco could only think his daughter's name. He scrambled to his feet just as the official was reaching the count of 9. Hey, you okay, Bomber? The ref asked. Fine. Slipped when the kid caught me. Both men knew that was a lie. The name of the referee inspecting Marco was Steve Milton. He was a Brooklyn native who had been working on the sport for over 32 years. DeMarco didn't realize it, but when he was 16, Steve had officiated his New York State Junior Golden Glove Championship bout, and he had been the only one to raise his hand in victory that night. Watch that kid, he told his wife during dinner that same evening. Best fighter I've seen come to New York in a long time. He's gonna be somebody someday. Steve had followed DeMarco's career closely, and was heartbroken after witnessing his fall from grace. Nevertheless, he respected the veteran fighter and wanted to see him redeem himself. He looked into DeMarco's eyes for any sign of life. He wasn't cognizant of his favoritism, but Steve knew that the fight was the Bronx Bomber's last opportunity at a comeback, and deep in the depths of his consciousness, he dreaded having to be the one to hammer the final nail in the coffin of DeMarco Rooney's career. If it were any other man on any other night, Steve would have ended the fight then and there, but this was somehow different. A champion of New York, his New York, deserved better than a TKO. He deserved a fighter's chance. You sure you're good to go, Bomber? He asked again. The battered warrior glared ferociously in Steve's eyes. Let me fight. The official stepped aside. DeMarco put his gloves up and bit down hard on his mouth guard, readying himself for punishment, but before the kid could get another shot in, the bell rang, and the round was over. DeMarco slogged back to his corner, each step an agonizing exercise in fortitude. His head had moved beyond the point of pain. His face was numb. DeMarco sat down gingerly and took a sip of water. It hurt too much to swallow, so he spat it out into the bucket. DeMarco, Richie stated, his coarse voice rising and falling like a rocky mountain range. I think it's over. You fought bravely. No, the heavyweight interrupted. I ain't going out like a chump. Don't you dare throw in the towel, Rich. Ain't no shame in taking the L here. Richie looked into the pleading face of his old friend. DeMarco's skin glistened with sweat and Vaseline. His left eye was almost swollen shut. I need this, Rich. There's only one round left. Don't take it from me. The woman was standing in the ring now, right next to the Russian. Nobody was even acknowledging her. DeMarco knew not to mention it to Richie. If he did, his trainer would have surely asked the ref to stop the bout for fear of his health. Richie was already gripping the towel so tight his knuckles had turned white.